Welcome to the video tutorial on how to set up your basic pool settings using Turbo Tourney. This is kind of the first video in a set of multiple videos that we'll make available, kind of an increasing nature of complexity. So this first one is just pretty much the initial settings that you'll want to set to get your pool started, just kind of the basic settings. So the first thing that we want to do, or the easiest way to initially start configuring your pool options, is to use the setup wizard that comes with the Turbo Tourney. And you can access the setup wizard either by selecting the tools menu and then the setup wizard, or you can select the setup wizard from the toolbar, which is the wand here. So the first screen that comes up then is the general information screen. You can kind of see here on the left the different pieces of information that we're going to be able to set up with this wizard. So the first thing on here is your tournament name. You can basically call your pool anything you want. In our case, it's called My Office Pool. And then in the current year, and this is the year of the pool tournament, which, depending on the year that you're using, this is what you want to set it up as. And what this is used for is to, in terms of downloading the pairings and results from the turbotourney.com website, it'll use this to know which one to download. And kind of a neat little trick on this is that if you set your pool year back 1 year, you'll be able to download the pairings and results from the prior year, which is useful if you want to try doing some testing and playing around with the software before the tournament. You can get last year's information and kind of give that a try. But the key is to make sure that you come back and change this back to the current year so you get the correct pairings and results. And then you have some information here to record your contact name and your contact email. So you can put in your name here and your email address, which is just basically your information for players to get a hold of you, and that'll display on some of the reports and web pages. And then you have your choice now between men's and women's tournaments, and this would only be if you're using Turbo Tourney. If you're using Turbo Tourney Pro, you would set this up through the tournament setup. But for Turbo Tourney, this is where you can determine which kind of tournament are you running. Is it a men's tournament or a women's tournament? And then it gives you just some information here that's you're running a 64-team tournament, and your entry format is fill out the entire bracket and select next. This takes us to the regional matchup screen, and the regional matchups are important to make sure that we have the right regions or locations meeting up in the finals so that the right teams are playing each other. So it's important to get that correct, but for most people it's not a big deal to put this in, because when we download the pairings, we're going to go ahead and also download these matchups so that when we get everything, we pull all the information from the template. And so for now I'm going to say not to worry about the matchups, because when we do the download, we'll pull in the matchups from that file. We can also then have the ability here to change what the round names are called. So if you want to change this to Field of 64, you can change that, and that'll show up on your reports that way. So you have the ability to customize what the labels should say for each round. And then there's the seed multiplier, which we'll talk about when we get into the scoring options, but this is basically considered what the round number is, 1 through 6. But you can change this if you want to try to do maybe some different things. Maybe you want to weight round 1 games higher or lower. You could change the round number to be a different number, and then when we get to the scoring options, it'll use kind of that round number to make a difference when it does the scoring. So for our pool, we're just going to leave these as the defaults, and we'll select next. So that takes us to the locations and dates screen. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about this because I'm going to download these when I download the pairings from the tournament template. So I'm just going to go ahead and say next on this one as well. And here we get to the player information screen. And this screen is important because it basically defines what information you want to collect from your players when they enter your pool. And you have some different options here of fields you can collect. These are just the defaults, but you can obviously change these to anything you want. In our pool, the player ID is the email address of the person. And the key thing to remember about the player ID field is that it has to be unique for everyone who enters your pool. So if you have someone who is going to be submitting multiple entries, you really wouldn't be able to use something like the email address unless they entered a different email address for each entry. If you use something like their name, you can just go ahead and have them add like their name with a number 2 for their second bracket to help keep them separated. In our pool, we only allow one entry for each email address, so that player ID works just fine for us. And then in my player information 1, I'll leave that as phone number, and I have some options here now for the field to define what kind of the field is this. Is it a text or is it a list of things that I want to collect? And where this comes into play is when you do the entry page for your website. If you use the deploy via web to put an entry page on the web, the entry form actually will either give them a text field to type in this information or give them a list. And that's also true for if you add a player through the screens here within Turbo Tourney. It will give you a list versus a text box. So for us, phone number is going to be just text. But then we also collect, let's say in our pool we want to collect the state that the player's from. And in our pool we are only going to say we're going to collect people from Iowa and Minnesota, but we want to know which state they're in. We can go ahead and create this to make this to be a list, and we'll select the kind of the pencil icon. And here's where we can just type in what are the list of values that should show up when a player enters. And for ours, we're going to say that the 2 choices are Iowa and Minnesota. I could also point this to a text file on my computer that has the same information in a list, and it would use that. But for ours, we can have just the 2 here. We'll say OK. And the third piece of information we collect is the player name, and that's text. The route using then is important because it tells the program of these fields that I'm collecting from my player, which one of those is the email address. So in our case, we're saying player ID right here is what we're going to use to collect the email address. So we want to change our route using to be using the player ID field. If I wasn't collecting an email address, I would just go ahead and say no routing. And then I can also, if I want to, identify one of these fields as being a password field. So when a player submits their picks, they have to enter in a password. This is normally used for if you do, say, a round-by-round repick pools where maybe after the first 2 rounds, people come back and they fill out their brackets for the next 2 rounds. But you want to make them type in their password. So the first time they submit their entry, they'll enter in a password, and then the next time when they submit their entry, they put their password in again, and that password is matched up when you load the entries so that you kind of confirm that it's the same person submitting the entry for that player ID. In our case, we don't use the password, so I'll leave that as none. And then I have some options here for some checkbox fields on the entry page. If there's something I want to collect from that player that is represented as far as like a checkbox, and we can do something like has the player paid yet, and we'll set a default on that as no. So you can also set kind of what the default value should be when the player first signs up. So that's kind of the player information setup, and we'll go ahead and select next, which takes us to the scoring options. And here we can choose from 3 different types of scoring. We have standard scoring, seed scoring, and underdog scoring. And so you can use any of these scoring options. You can use all of them. We can do combinations. We can say I want to use standard scoring, underdog scoring, or I want to use all of them, or I just want to use whichever one. And each one will be calculated individually, and whichever ones you have selected or turned on, it'll just add them together. So in my situation, if I have them all 3 checked, it will add up whatever points they've earned for the game for standard scoring, plus whatever points we give them for seed scoring, plus whatever points they got for underdog scoring. So under standard scoring, it's pretty straightforward. It's just the number of points that will be awarded for each correct pick in each of those rounds. This is just the default setting. In our pool, we like to award 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as the points. So we put some weight toward the later games, but not as heavily as the default. And then in seed scoring, you have a number of different options on how you want to do your seed scoring. You could do just straight. If the person picks a 5 team to win and the 5 team wins, they get 5 points. Or you can say if the 5 seed wins, they get 5 times whatever round it was in, and this is where that round number comes into play from the previous screen. So in my case, if I say seed number times round number, and they pick a 5 seed in the first round, you would think that would be 5 points, and that would only be true if I had 1 as my round multiplier for the first round. So if I change my round multiplier in round 1 to be 10, they would get 50 points. So you can use that round multiplier back on the matchup screen to kind of help determine if you want to do some different scoring with seed numbers. So there's a lot of different options here on how you might want to do your seed scoring. Another option is the seed factor, which works similar to using just straight seed numbers, but you can actually just assign a different value to the seed. So in our pool, we award 5 points for every correct game you pick for seeds 1 through 10, but we give you some extra points for anything higher than that, anything from 11 to 16. So instead of just using the straight seed numbers, we're going to use the seed factor. Then there's also an option for underdog scoring. This is if the player picks a team to win that has a higher seed than the team they're playing. And you have some options here as far as points per round. So if you pick a team to win the first round as an underdog and they win that game as an underdog, then you'll get 1 point. Or you can also use the seed difference. So if you pick, say you pick a 12 seed to beat a 5 seed, you would get 7 points for that pick. And we can also set some criteria in terms of does the underdog scoring apply to all the seeds, or maybe you want to say that we only give underdog points if the seed number is, say, 7 or higher. So if a 6 seed beats a 4 seed, we don't consider that to be really a big enough of an underdog, so we don't want to award any points for that. And you can also specify, do underdog scoring, does it apply every round or just particular rounds? So maybe you only award points for underdog scoring for the first 2 rounds, so you can uncheck those options. So you can really set this up kind of any way you want to have the underdog scoring work. In our pool, we use we'll say we don't use any underdog scoring. So that's how you set up the scoring options. And then you come to the tiebreaker screen, and here's where you specify what you want to do in the event that 2 players have the same number of points. And you can choose to either break ties or not break ties. Generally, you'll want to use the tiebreakers. And then you can decide at what point do you want to break ties. Do you want to break the ties just when the tournament's over, or do you want to do it during the tournament? In most cases, we just want to break them at the end of the tournament, which is usually the only time that it matters. So if after the first round, 5 people have the same number of points, it's probably not really that big of a deal to break their ties. But if you want to, you can do that by saying during the tournament. Then you have an option here what to do if your tiebreakers aren't known yet. One of the common things that people collect as a tiebreaker is the total points in the championship game. And during the tournament, if you're breaking ties, that tiebreaker is not known yet. So you can tell the program here what you want to do if that's the case, either just to stop right there and don't do anything else, or you can have it break whatever it can, so it'll kind of keep going. And if there's other tiebreakers it can use, like pick percentage, it will use that to try to break the ties. We're just going to leave ours at stop at first unknown. And now you have your choices of the 3 different tiebreakers. Again, you have kind of a wide variety of things you can choose from. The total points in the final game is what we typically use for our first tiebreaker. And then you can use anything else for your other ones. We like to use pick percentage. And then for our third tiebreaker, most teams in the second round. So that's really how you would set up your tiebreakers. There's also an option here for that tiebreaker game, the total points option. If the player has to be, if they go over that tiebreaker, if they basically lose that tiebreaker. So it's kind of that their bust if over option. So you can just decide if that's something you want to use in your pool or not. And we'll select next. And now all of our options are basically set up and ready to go for our pool. And we'll leave this option checked here to display the pairings window when we're done, because we're going to start we're going to go ahead and download the pairings from last year right away. So it looks like finish. And now the pairings window comes up. So I've saved all my pool settings, and I could either now go ahead and start typing in the teams if the bracket has been announced, or the easiest thing to do is just download the bracket from the web. I'm actually going to download the pairings from last year's tournament when I select this option. And if you remember, I had mentioned earlier about the regional matchups. Right here is where it's going to be included in this download. So it's not a big deal if you set those up ahead of time. If you go ahead and you can turn this on to have it just download it from the bracket template when it's posted. So along with the team seeds and the team names, you can also download their records and the regional matchups, the locations, that kind of thing. So typically you'll just want to leave these all selected and take the defaults and just download everything from the bracket template. And here it shows you what the assignments are for the bracket based on the template. If you would like to have it set up a different way, like maybe you want to have Atlanta and Phoenix on the left side and St. Louis and East Rutherford on the right side, you can just switch those around and the bracket will load that way for you. But generally I just would suggest just leave the defaults as they are, but you can certainly change them if you want. And so we'll go ahead and start loading the pairings. And so now all of our pairings are now loaded into the pairings window from the bracket template. And we just say OK. And there's our kind of our bracket now is set up and ready to go. So that was just a quick overview of some of the basic settings that you'll need to configure to get your pool started with